Welcome. Today I'm going to demonstrate how we would actually build a metal stud wall. Metal stud consists of a U-track. We call it a U-track because of the shape. It's shaped like a letter U. We also have a C stud, and again because of the shape. The C stud actually clicks into the U-track, which I'll demonstrate in a short while. Both are available in various widths and lengths. This is a lightweight gauge metal, but we also do it in a heavy gauge metal. Also available in the U-track are different depths depending on your project. So let's have a look at some of the tools that you're going to need to put a metal stud partition together. A pair of tin snips. These are used for cutting the metal. A chalk line, which will help us do the setting out. A tape measure to do all our measurements. Stanley knife. We won't be using this until we actually come to install our plasterboards. A cordless drill or a drill. This is a specialist drywall screw gun. If at home you have a cordless drill, you can still put the partition together. You'll need a spirit level. And finally, the most important, a pencil. First of all, we have a wafer head screw. This is only 13 millimeters in length and is used for fixing the metal track down to timber floors. The reason being is timber floor coverings all start at 18 millimeters, whether it be floorboards or chipboard flooring. So if there are any hidden cables or water pipes, etc., hidden under that floor, we're not going to hit them. If we have concrete floors or concrete soffits, we can use what is known as in the trade as a nailable plug. If you're fixing into timber, you will need a high thread screw. The rule of thumb is you need a minimum of 25 millimeters into the timber. So if your ceiling is already plasterboarded with a 12.5 millimeter plasterboard, 25 millimeters into the timber, 37.5 millimeters total, the nearest screw length is 38 millimeters. If unfortunately you don't have timber or a concrete soffit to fix into, there are specialist screws available, and these would actually fix straight into the plasterboard. And finally, a self-tapping screw. This will be used to fix the plasterboards to the metal stud partition. Again, the minimum requirement is 10 millimeters into the metal, 12.5 mil board plus 10, 22.5, a 25 millimeter screw will be required. So the first thing that we need to do is mark the position of our metal stud wall. Take the measurement and put a pencil mark. Do the same at the opposite end. And now between those two marks, we can use our chalk line to mark the position. That marks a position for our U-track to be fixed to the floor. Mark the length of the U-track on the back. And using our tin snips, we can cut down either side of the U-track, fold it over and cut across. Always take care. Protect your hands. Metal is sharp. Wear a pair of safety gloves. We now need to fix the track down to the floor. It's a timber floor, so I will be using the 13 mil wafer head screws. We actually fix the track down to the floor every 600 millimeters. You will notice that the U-track has service holes in. These are actually 600 millimeters apart, and the first one from the end of the U-track is 300 millimeters. This makes it easier when we're fixing. If I place a fixing at the end of the U-track, I then need one in the middle. Our U-track is now securely fixed to the floor. We now need to cut a stud to length so we can actually plumb that up against our wall. So we take a stud. Again, we would actually measure from floor to ceiling. The studs, unlike timber, are never cut tight. We would actually cut them 3 to a maximum 5 millimeters shorter than the floor to ceiling height. Now a stud's cut to length, it doesn't matter which way it actually goes into the track on the floor. There's no top or bottom. Place it into our U-track and click into place. Place against our wall surface, and we now need to plumb it. You can't get this to happen to timber. Yes, we use magnetic levels. We now need to fix our C-stud to our wall surface. I know behind this plasterboard wall I have timber, so I will be using a 38mm high thread screw. I will fix into each stud as opposed to every 600mm. So that's our C-stud securely fixed to my background. Remember, if yours is brick or breeze block, you will need the nailable plugs. With our ceiling track now cut, we can put it into position. We can do that by placing over the stud that we have fixed to our wall, using another stud cut to length, place into the top and bottom track, plumb, put a pencil mark. That's for guidance. We can now fix our track to the ceiling. Now we can fix our U-track to the ceiling every 600mm. For longer stud walls, you can mark either end of the partition. That way you can snap a chalk line between the two marks and then use the line as a guide to fix your U-track to. This is the end of our partition, so where the stud actually stops, we need to fix it into position. We do that by using a 13mm wafer head screw. And now, the same at the top. With all our studs cut and roughly placed in position, our plasterboards do all the setting out for us. So if we're using a 1200mm wide plasterboard, our studs would go at 600 centres. If we're using a 900 wide plasterboard, our studs would go at 450mm centres. The exception being if you're creating a bathroom. The studs must go at 400 centres because of the additional weight of tiles. None of the intermediate studs are actually fixed in position. They are left to move freely because our plasterboards will do all our setting out for us. There is no requirement for noggins as there is with timber. Noggins have no structural value. They're in there for one reason and one reason only, and that is to prevent the timbers from bowing. Metal doesn't twist or warp. There's no wet rot, no dry rot. It's also lightweight, therefore it's easier to handle. It can be stored outside, unlike timber. There are lots of benefits to using metal stud, but the biggest is the speed of installation. We're now ready For plasterboarding our stud partition, we always start with half a plasterboard because the boards help us do the setting out of our studs. So what we'll do is we're using a 1200mm wide board, so we'll mark 600. We'll do that on either end of our plasterboard. And between those two marks now, we can put a score line and snap our board. What we need is a straight edge between the two marks. You don't need to place a lot of pressure. The knife only needs to score the paper. Our plasterboard now is scored. I'm going to get somebody to help me to actually turn this plasterboard over so I can cut from the other side. You'll notice now we've scored the paper on one side, it will quite easily snap. Need to now cut to length. So again, using our tape measure, two marks, and again between the two marks place a straight edge, or in this case a spirit level, snap and cut. We're now ready to fix our plasterboard to our partition. So within our board now cut to size, we've cut the plasterboard in half, 600, and we've also cut to the height. No plasterboard should ever be in contact with the ground. Gypsum loves water. Even on freshly laid concrete, it will suck out the moisture from the concrete. This is a board lifter. This will lift the plasterboard up from the floor and tie it up against the ceiling. Alternatively, you could place two small pieces of offcut of plasterboard onto the floor and rest your plasterboard onto them, like so. We're now ready for fixing our plasterboard to the partition. Using the 25mm self-tapping screw and this, a drywall screw gun. This is a specialist tool used for fixing the plasterboards to the metal stud. It has a depth gauge on it which is adjustable so we don't go too deep with the screws. On your normal cordless drill that you may have at home, you can buy an attachment that fits to the drill that does exactly the same thing. Your local builders merchants will give you advice on these. So we're now ready. We're now going to fix our 600mm board to our partition. We're going to use the board lifter because it shouldn't be in contact with the ground. Using a 25mm self-tapping screw, I can screw into that position against the wall. I can now slide my stud into place. It has a center line which you can position on the edge of the plasterboard. Again, just to hold it in place, I can screw fix. We now screw fix every 300mm. The guns weren't designed with this in mind, but if you actually put the battery on and strike with the tip of the drill, they will be approximately 300mm apart. I have my 600 piece of plasterboard on the opposite side of the partition. Top tip is to mark the centre of a 1200 width plasterboard, which will highlight where the stud is. You see now the advantage of having our centre line and not having to guess where the stud is. Another advantage of the metal stud is I can now position that onto the centre line, so the studs are actually moving as we build our partition, we can now fix the plasterboard at 300 centres. So I started with half a plasterboard, and in this case a 600 rip. I've now placed a 1200 plasterboard on the opposite side. It is important that you stagger the joints for both acoustics and fire. Also, it's very similar to brick bonding. It improves the strength of the partition. We have a centre line, so we know where our stud is, and I can screw into it. The end stud now, I can pull into position. Got my centre line, and now I can screw into place. So this is our stud partition actually finished. Metal stud, doesn't twist, doesn't warp, and it's much quicker to install, and it's just as strong as a timber partition when it's finished. Happy building.